Hello everyone, my name is Rick van Bruggen from Neotechnology, and here we are again recording another podcast for our Graphistania podcast series. And tonight I've got a lovely guest all the way from California, Mouse Reeve from the Internet Archive. Hi Mouse.
Hi there.
Hey, thank you for
Oh,
coming online and doing this interview. Really
my
appreciate it.
pleasure.
Mouse, we got introduced by the spider in the graph web. That is Michael Hunger. Michael told me a little bit about your projects, but maybe for our listeners, would you mind introducing yourself a little bit?
Yeah, of course. Um, so my project is grimoire.org, which is a website that is built on a graph database that tries to map out historical texts about how to do magic or grimoires. Um, and it looks at the way in which content and metadata is shared between different grimoires and where that shows up at different times in different places in history. That's kind of the short version.
Well, so help me and our listeners, explain a little bit more about what a grimoire is. What should I think about when I think about a grimoire?
For sure. So the definition of a grimoire, I think technically is a book of magic or invocations. It's just a book that has practical how-to instructional information about how to do magic. And that can be kind of folk magic, like doing spells for healing, or it can be ritual magic, summoning demons, communing with angels. And I'm focusing on grimoires from the Christian tradition in Europe in kind of the early modern period. So mostly between probably the 15th century and the 18th century.
Wow, is that a big thing, Mouse? Is this something that used to be like a something that everyone knew about in medieval times, or what was this really?
I couldn't tell you how widely circulated the books were necessarily, but it was definitely really a part of people's worldview at the time that demons and angels were very real parts of people's concept of reality. And so the idea that you could summon a demon or that you could ask advice from an angel or that a prayer could be, a prayer and a ritual was a way to deal with illness or farm productivity was a pretty like normal thing that was kind of part of life, I think, to a degree that's definitely not true today.
Wow, unbelievable! And how does that relate to the wonderful world of graphs, Mouse? How did you use graphs in that domain?
Yeah, I mean, I started using graphs because it's a data structure that really reflects it really reflects the way that I think about anything that I'm thinking about, most things I think about. Particularly in this case, I'm looking at the interconnectivity between these books. And so I'm looking at, say, the demon Lucifer or Asmodee, and if they appear in multiple books. And so a graph really lends itself to connecting pieces of data, like in this case, two grimoires that are connected by another thing, which is like a demon or a spell that shows up in multiple grimoires. So a graph really lends itself to looking at the interconnectivity of historical data in these texts.
So that's what you use on your grimoire.org website as well. You spell
Yep.
out those relationships between demons, between spells, and all of those types of
Yeah.
things.
I have a kind of a nightmare Python script that tries to turn all of the relationships. It like makes a website for Node and tries to turn all those relationships into something that looks very human readable.
It's it's a
With like
it's a
it's
demon
mostly
Python script or something like that, no?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, that kind of sort of relates to, why did you use graphs? I mean, what I'm hearing here is that the model is really very much a graph, and that's why it's such a good fit for a graph
Mhm.
database, right? Is that
Yeah,
yes?
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, I would imagine trying. I can kind of imagine if I had tried to use a relational database, the massive multiplicity of types of relationships and types of data would have just been, I would just be writing database migrations all day, every day.
uh, and
So,
now you can just expand the model as you go along. Is that it or?
right, yeah, exactly. Like having not having a strict schema means that I can just enter data and have it be really flexible and reflect the really nuanced and varied ways in which things relate to each other. And it's focused on relationships, which is what specifically I want to look at with these texts.
And was there anything like new or interesting that you discovered, because of, you know, dealing with this data in this way, or anything
Yeah,
particular that you
absolutely.
want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is finding relationships between texts that I didn't realize existed before, because a lot of these texts are available online, and I try to link out to the full document. But you read them, you read a book or you read a PDF, and it seems very self-contained, but it's really illuminated the way in which the people who wrote these were communicating with other people in their time and with older texts. Um, so one of the specific thing that I thought was really cool that I found through this is looking at the sigil of Lucifer, which is pretty iconic. Like sometimes I see people with tattoos on the street, and it's usually attributed to one grimoire, Grimorium Verum, that has a version of it that's very clearly the one that the Church of Satan adopted within the last 50 years. But I was able to find versions of it that go back to the 1500s by looking at connections between the content of these books. And so it was really cool to take a book that's relatively well known and pretty famous, like Grimorium Verum. It shows up in like the Hellblazer comics, for example, and see that it actually is rooted in much earlier texts. And then you can trace it back to the Key of Solomon, which is often looked at as unrelated, but has actually roots in the same texts from hundreds of years earlier.
Oh my God, that is super interesting. It's almost like, biblical studies. It sounds a little bit like that to
Yeah.
me.
I mean, the Bible is a note in my database.
Is it? No,
Oh, yeah,
serious?
absolutely. And I
Oh.
have biblical quotes. Most demons aren't mentioned by name in the Bible.
Uh-huh.
The Bible mentions Lucifer and Leviathan, um, but demonology really is mostly non-canonical.
Uh-huh.
It's mostly stuff that was developed a lot later in history.
Yeah, yeah,
But there definitely are connections to the Bible, and I'm looking at Christian books, so it's important to look at like the fundamental script of Christianity.
totally get it. Wow, that's super interesting. I mean, there's so many actually really interesting projects around these text analysis
Mhm.
that involve graphs, right? I mean, even things like the Panama Papers or stuff like that. It's
Yeah,
it's kind of related to it, right? Because it involves analyzing texts and finding links between texts at the end of the day.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
That's really cool. So, what does the future hold for this project, and maybe for your work in general, Maus? Where is this going?
Mostly, I'm really excited about new translations coming out of old grimoires, and so a lot of what's on the forefront is me just doing a whole lot more research and fleshing out the data and adding a lot of excerpts and images. I've started adding images to my website finally. So that's mostly. I'm also really excited about Neo4j 3 because I use Python and I've heard some cool things about how to work with Python with Neo4j. So I'm starting to look into that. But mostly just I'm going to read more books and add more data.
Excellent, excellent. And how do you look at the industry around us? Like you work at the Internet Archive, so you must have a perspective on what the industry is going to be doing with this type of technology, or do you?
Um, None of the work that I do at the Internet Archive is particularly graph related.
Okay.
Um, so I don't know that I could speak to it in that capacity.
No, no, I understand. No, no, no. But just as a software engineer or a technical
Yeah,
person
I
in
mean, I think
general,
it's
yeah.
a really interesting technology, and like I've only used it in side projects. I've used it in a few different ways, but
Hmm.
it really lends itself to looking at a certain kind of data, and I think that's really promising.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat with me about this. I know what I'm going to do right after this call. I'm going to be exploring some of these demons and spells, just as a bedtime story. But thank you so much for coming online, and it was really, really cool to learn about this stuff, and I'm sure our listeners will think the same.
Great, thank you so much
Thank you, Melissa, and I'll hope to meet you someday.
for sure.
Cheers.